through with interest and so forth. Now, if Muslims are serious about a wider Islamic economic and financial system, my argument is they have to look beyond these individual roles, these individual scholars, to other Sharia institutions, other Sharia ideals. Much more would be needed for the full Islamic Sharia system, the Sharia system to apply. To explain, I mean, if you look at Islamic legal history, this grand goal of Sharia was achieved by multiple institutions and under multiple doctrines of Islamic law besides simply the narrow civil or private law. For example, there was the role by which you exhort people, Muslims, to rise to a higher moral level in their behavior. This is not only Islamic legal rulings, but sort of the ethical impulse of the Quran and the Sunnah generally. There are many who are engaged in that in old Islamic societies. Then there's the notion of Islamic governance. No scholar ever operated independently of a state, and the state had its own obligations under Sharia to advance welfare and macro goals. So you can't expect individual scholars to advance that macro goal. That is the responsibility of governments and communities and so forth, who have a different sort of set of criteria from Islamic law in which to operate. And then thirdly, the importance of custom is huge in Islamic law. A lot of gaps have always been filled with custom. Custom is what society at large considers correct. And if it's a Muslim society, correct as Muslims. In a way, today, custom has developed that Islamic finance is Islamic. And it is taking hold. Maybe that custom is still correct. So to get implementation of any Islamic ideal under Sharia, you need all of these and more. So I think everyone does recognize that the Islamic finance scholars alone cannot carry the full responsibility of achieving the full goals of Islamic economics, finance, and so forth. The other stakeholders need to play a role. Now, who are these other stakeholders? First, very importantly, there are more scholars than those who are working on the Sharia boards. And they are extremely interested in the area of finance, commerce, property. They realize that a lot of foment, a lot of development is happening in these fields. And they're engaging, even though they're not taking a salary from the Islamic finance institution payment. For example, the Mahid al-Fiqh, the Fiqh Academy of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Conference, recently came out strongly in opposition to a very widespread transaction called Vogel. It's being largely ignored, by the way. But there are other scholars who have deeply getting involved in this. And as they become involved, the center of gravity within the scholarly community will shift. There are also other industry organizations that need to step up to the plate. The standard setters, the rating agencies, the regulators, the governments seem to be glad about the direction so far because it aligns everything with commercial banking. They know how to handle that. And those who are involved in the industry see that as essential for success. So they've been applauding this tendency. Now, consumers and practitioners are beginning to suffer some doubts because they're worried, how are they going to market these products in the future if the difference from commercial banking is only formal? So these organizations need to decide what direction do they want to turn, because as they demand different results from the Islamic scholars, they'll probably get them. Now, so again, I think Islamic finance is at a crossroads. Should it continue to assimilate to commercial conventional banking or go this other direction? I think it will actually go the other direction. It will start to operate as an opening wedge for other goals of the Islamic communities and countries, societies. There will be both, narrow, very permissive and much less permissive Islamic forms of Islamic finance. The call now is to create Islamic-based transactions, ones that are thought through from the ground up as according with the Islamic ideals, rather than conventional transactions with a few things cut off and replaced. And those kinds of organizations, institutions will emerge and compete with the more permissive ones. So to return to the scholars, I suspect that even they will start some degree of retrenchment, even the ones that have been so permissive so far. I would say you should watch Taqi Usmani, Sheikh Taqi Usmani from Pakistan, who has in the past been willing, even though he's on all sorts of Islamic boards, to say a word in slight dissent. And I think we may hear something from him. So again, other scholars who are not working on boards are becoming involved. Second, we shouldn't underestimate the Islamic legal methodology, even as practiced by scholars in their current role. It is extraordinarily rich. The methods that scholars have used so far have been largely literalistic ones, narrow, literal applications of the old laws, trying to see how far they can be expanded to deal with modern institutions, using mere analogy or relatively verbal compliance. It's interesting to see how far these things go. Most transactions can be analogized to some old form of legal transaction, agency, pledge, sale. Their analogies are possible. So that could be done. But they also have other methodologies in their quiver. For example, they're underlying all the specific legal rulings of Islamic law and their analogies are basic legal principles called qawaid, which actually are extremely important whenever one is facing the problem of applying Islamic law to relatively new transactions. You fall back on these qawaid. These qawaid are sort of common legal principles and maxims that help predict particular outcomes. They are not themselves the law, but they are very useful rules of thumb to navigate within the complexity of Islamic law. These are very important now, somewhat rational, but tethered to the original specific outcomes. And then the maqasid al-sharia, which is the objectives of Islamic law. This is the great hope, I would say. This is a very serious theory put forward in, I think, the 14th century, worked out particularly well 600 years ago. It's relatively new by Islamic standards. Therefore, it still is sort of winning its way, but it is intellectually very serious. What it calls for is that one should study all of the body of Islamic law inductively, and then ask yourself, what does this show about God's intent? Turns out, surprisingly, God's intent is the benefit of human beings, even on this world. And second, to reveal a law that's susceptible to human reason. So even though the individual rules were reached by more or less literal interpretation, it turns out God had a revealed purpose he chose in order that human beings could rationalize these laws. And therefore, they can use their reason to extrapolate from them. And therefore, when they're seeking to make an application of the old Islamic law, they should always ask, what were these purposes? And that may mean a very non-literal application, especially now that circumstances in, say, the field of finance have changed so radically. So this allows a sort of a new rational process in which both the macro considerations, the consequential considerations, and the ethical ones could become much more powerful and allow scholars to divert from purely literal interpretations. It will give them added strength in doing so. And this is within their whole tradition. So the legal scholars also need to recognize that they're not operating within the institution of scholarship as was once known. They are individuals now. They are not social leaders. The most influential scholars of the past were also leaders of their society, responsible for many aspects of society, not just a single one, finance. Second, they were organized in those days into schools of thought. And that exerted a certain discipline on their opinions and gave them the power of a collective group. And then their laws were then constrained by social custom in the name of Sharia and governmental action in the name of Sharia, which often mitigated their excesses. So they need now to construct some kind of organization like that will fortify and discipline their positions. So there's a lot of work to be done. So conclusion would say that I think Islamic finance is here to stay. I think it's going to evolve considerably beyond where it is now. No doubt the banks and finance institutions, insurance companies, the capital and so forth that we have now will continue. But I think you should be very interested to see what else will emerge. And also to the extent to which even sukuk, Islamic bonds, Islamic banking, capital and so forth will become more stringent, more strict, and more adherent to the spirit as well as the form of Islamic law. Thank you.